Hello, everyone. Welcome to Morning Manna. Today, I want to share with you my testimony and my journey to marriage. Okay, my testimony and my journey to marriage. Now, I'm going to start in the middle of the story because it's too much to rehash back, but of course, I will definitely be transparent with you. First of all, let me say to you that I struggled with a couple of spirits. Okay, I struggled with the spirit of the fear of failure. I dealt with the spirit of validation, the spirit of fornication, and the spirit of acceptance and the spirit of acceptance. And so I dealt with those things from my childhood, okay? And a lot of that was put on pressure that I even put on myself to excel in life, okay? And so when it came to dealing with women, okay, dealing with women, because this is about my journey to marriage, um, I did not have the confidence and the machoism that a lot of what I perceived at that time my classmates in high school had. I did not have that. If anything, I was really the complete opposite. I was what you would consider the nerd. Okay, I was the nerd. Unfortunate with coming with being the nerd was in my high school class, let me say this, my high school class was not 500, 600 like many of your high school classes. My high school class was 32 people. I went to FAMU High School. It was a K through 12 school, very small, 32 people. So a lot of the things were very intimate as it pertained to how they dealt with us. So I don't regret going to the school, but it was a culture shock for me going from a very diverse school, elementary school at the time, then going to fifth grade at FAMU High School, and so where predominantly it was like 99% black. You know, and so there was a lot of things that was going on, especially as pertains to music, that I wasn't down with because my parents said that that's not the way we roll. That's not the way we're gonna go. But when it came to dating and women in high school, there was a lot of peer pressure, and I was dealing with wanting to be accepted amongst my classmates. And so you would hear them talk about having sex with this person, oh, having sex with that person, or I got with this person, I got with that person. Yeah, we're talking about high school, y'all. And you would hear these things. And I struggled with wanting to be accepted. And so I couldn't get down with you with the music because I didn't know Snoop Dogg. I didn't know Dr. Dre. Thank God I didn't. I didn't really know Public Enemy. I didn't know all those. I was, trust me, I was, you would say square, square. I was big into the R&B, um, classic rock. That was my speed, old school. And so the current rap could never fly in my mama's house and my dad's house. Thank God for standards. And so I then, everybody was dating and things like that. Oh, Calvin, you need a girlfriend, man. You need a girlfriend. Are you a virgin? I said, yeah. He says, oh man, you square, you square, you square. And so there was this peer pressure to uh date, but also to have sex with women because you want to be accepted. Okay. Let me say this to you. At this point, we're in high school, so I had given my life to the Lord. I was going to church every Sunday. Every Sunday. I was going to Sunday school every Sunday. And let me say this to you. I had a knowledge of the Lord, but I didn't know the Lord. Okay? I had knowledge of him, but I didn't know him. And so, and that's very important, especially as it pertains to being accepted. Okay? And so, uh, I dated a young lady, got into a relationship, and let me say this to you. My mother and my father were very strict about that I represent the family, especially even in dating. You didn't date multiple women at the same time. You didn't do that. When you date a young lady, you would introduce yourself. You would back then you would get to know their parents, and their parents would get to know their parents. All the stuff that we kind of need to go back to, but anyway, here or there. But um, that's what you would do. And so I did all that. I would ask her, hey, can I, Mrs. So and so, can I take your daughter out to the movies? And I would have her back at this time, and I would have them back at the time. I would do right. And this, we'll talk about dating on another podcast, but keeping the respectability was there. And ultimately, you start hugging and you're kissing, where you think it ultimately leads to. Of course, there was always this, wanting to have sex. So ultimately, that's what happened. That's what happened. And then people kind of got word like, wait, did they? Did they? Did they? Did they? And you kind of like, you don't say yes or no, but they can look on your face and know, oh my God, Calvin did this, Calvin did that, Calvin did. And it was like, you think that would give you the in or the keys in with the in crowd, but it didn't. It didn't. And ultimately, what it did was it started me on kind of a downward spiral as it pertained to women and relationships. Because once you get a taste of sex, it's almost like a drug. You got to have it again and again and again and again. Well, then ultimately, I broke up with this young lady, and there was this deficit because when you have sex with someone, you make a covenant bond with them. And then ultimately, of course, you break up with the person, and then you have this deficit, or you're connected to them covenantly. Okay. So then, approaching my senior year, um, and part of the issues that I dealt with my not just with my high school class, but just in the school in general, was being that nerd boy, never being accepted, never being in with the in crowd. Um, I struggled with that. I did. And I didn't understand. Like I've been doing all this stuff, and I got me a starter jacket. Back then it was starter jackets, and that was the popular thing. And my parents didn't have money like that to do that. But when I got me a starter jacket, I thought that would make me in with the in crowd. It didn't. So it's always this push to want to feel like you were a part, because amongst 32 kids, that's not a lot of kids. You would think that you'd be tighter than that. Nope. Nope. But, that pushed me to excel in my academics. I said, okay, got it. I understand. And I began, and let me say this to you, because of all the rejection, that built anger in me. And I was dealing with family issues at home also that further built that anger. I was dealing with wrath to a point. And I began to hate some of my classmates. I began to hate them. I'm being honest with you. And this stuff, all this stuff happening in high school, it carries with you unless you actively deal with it with the Lord. Okay. So ultimately, I graduated from high school, and I meet this young lady at Camp Can Do. I believe Bianca was 14 or 15 years old. I think she was. And ultimately, I was trying to introduce her to my brother. But as I began to talk with her and hang out with her and everything and joke and laugh, it was just something so special about her, even at that age, just something different. And we began to date. We began to date. And you know what? When the summer was over, the summer in the Can Can Do, we were still talking, dating. I My heart turned for another young lady that I saw in a grocery store. And I started dating this young lady. Now, let me say this to you off the top. I have a very high standard of cheating. Okay. People think cheating is just physical intimacy. No, when your heart gets turned, that's when the cheating begins. And so my heart turned, and I started dating a young lady while I was dating uh, Bianca. And of course, it got back to Bianca. It became a whole thing. And that was the last time I heard from Bianca, 1997. That was the last time. And I began to date this young lady, and we began to date. We dated for about 4 years. Of course, I would end up going into the band. marching in the band for 2 years, then doing pharmacy school. Now, let me say with you, in all that time frame, I would do things to continuously feel accepted. Okay, I had people in college I hung out with, even though I didn't do marijuana at all. I didn't. They did, but I hung out with them. Okay, I was while they were smoking the marijuana, I was smoking the black and mild, wanting to feel accepted. And little did I know, of course, you're around people who smoke marijuana, you get what? Contact high. And man, that could have just thoroughly ruined my high school, not my high school, my college career, because I was just hanging around the wrong people, wanting to feel like I was accepted, I was part of a group. People who said, yeah, we down with Cal, we down, we all down. Okay. And so still dealing with that, then going through pharmacy school. And here I am, a kid that's used to A's and B's, and now there's C's creeping in. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm failing, I'm failing. But in pharmacy school, they used to say, see your way out. Get a C, get to the next level. But the point of it was that where you were deficient at, you're supposed to learn from it. Okay, you're supposed to learn from it. And so you learn that information you didn't learn, and then you kind of build on that as you matriculate through. But there was this one class, microbiology, year number one, semester number two. And the Lord really dealt with me because I had a D going into that test, and you need a C to get out of it. And I calculated every which way I could to get a C out the class. And I had to get like a perfect 100 plus some extra points. There was no other way, and I went into the test, and my hand, when the teacher said start, my hand literally did this, y'all. And I'm like, I gotta get a perfect score on this test to pass the class. And God rest her soul, who was my roommate, Miss Dr. Triniqua Anderson. I love Nikki. She was my roommate. We had an apartment, Shaker Heights Apartments, Tallahassee, Florida. And she was my classmate. And man, she was so instrumental in helping me stay cool getting through pharmacy school. We would study together, and then we say, okay, we're not doing no more studying. When we get up there, we don't talk to nobody, we don't say nothing, and then we just go in and take the test. And I said, Nikki, I'm going to fail pharmacy. I'm going to be a year back. I'm going to be a year back. She says, no, don't talk like that, Calvin. Don't talk like that. And so then when I went to Dr. Hyman to go look at the grade, and I talked to Dr. Hyman about my struggles in the class. And when I saw that C, I screamed. I saw people walking out her thing, teared up, crying and everything. And the Lord said this to me. This is one of the first time I heard him audible. He says, don't you ever forget that you need me. He said, don't you ever forget that you need me. You cannot do this by yourself. And that brought me back to reality as pertained to me studying in school, that it's not on my ingenuity, but it's by his wisdom and it's by his grace that he helped carry me through. Now, I was still in this one relationship that I left Bianca for. And ultimately, um, I got hurt real bad. Hurt real bad. Um, I got cheated on. And that hurt and that rejection after 4 years was brutal. It was like it compounded it. And um, I then, I was intimate with her. And so then, that's another deficit in me. That's another emotional hole in me. Still dealing with the first one and now this one. And ultimately, I end up not graduating. I end up going on my externship in Jacksonville, Florida, to do rotations for pharmacy school there. And then, of course, like I told you, sex is like a drug. Okay. I get out there and I'm going to work in a doctor's office and I meet another young lady, sweet, kind, everything. And we began to talk and we began to date. We went out and this, that, and the other. Of course, what happens? Yep, sex, fornication. Absolutely. Never failed at that point. And so I dated this young lady and I was staying at her house. She would come over to my apartment and all this. Yes, for those shacking, that's the word that you want to say. Shacking, that's the word. Okay. And so um ultimately I get back to Tallahassee and graduated. I wasn't planning on going back to Jacksonville. I was like, the long distance relationship can't work or whatever, and I break up with the young lady. And um, at that point, I really felt like I was still spiraling. I was still spiraling because I was still dealing with that acceptance, dealing with that fear of failure, dealing with that anxiety. Okay. Of course, I had to take the boards, and the anxiety was so bad at time. I did not know it was anxiety. I just thought it was nerves, but it was anxiety. I didn't know that. And when I get ready to do part two of this, and I tell you because I have to do part two, um, this will come to a head. And so, um, ultimately, I passed my boards. I I get me a house. I got me a car. I'm still going to church every Sunday. I was driving back from Jacksonville to church at times and going to play for the choir and all this stuff. I was still doing all this stuff in the church, right? So ultimately, after that, I would um I would meet this young lady in the church. Okay. Meet this young lady in church. Very kind and sweet soul. Even to this day, a very kind and sweet soul. And the more I started dating her and talking with her, there was no intimacy there. But I was like, yeah. And I was hanging out with her family and we were playing cards and everything. We were having a good time going out. And I believed at that point, I was like, okay, yeah, this is the one. This is the one. I believe this is the girl I'm going to marry. I just believe this is the girl I'm going to marry. And the Lord said nothing at that point. Now she was helping me with the kids, helping me in Sunday school and this and other. A lot of people in church saw us dating. They just believed that was going to be the relationship. We're going to be good. We're going to be tight and we are going to make it. And ultimately, one night, we still hanging out, playing cards, all this. One night, she calls me around 12 a.m. and says, I think we need to break up. My world came crashing down. And the reason why it came crashing down so bad, it wasn't so much the fact that she wanted to break up with me, but also because of the imagery and what people would think. Remember, I told you about the acceptance part and imagery, what people would think, because here we are, we go to the same church. Church is small country church, so everybody knows everybody. And I was like, wait, no, hold on. What did I do something wrong? She says, no, you didn't do anything wrong. I just don't love you the way that you love me. And there was nothing I could do to fix that. But come to find out that her mother, God rest her soul, um, her mother had told her that if you don't love that man loves you, he wants to marry you. If you don't love him that same way, you need to let him go. Woo, that was tough to hear. That was tough to hear because I believed I was gonna marry her. And she told me that, I just don't love you that the way you love me. And that hurt. That was so devastating. And I'll never forget. It's like, we would go to church every Sunday, and I would see her and everything. It wasn't nothing bitter or anger, but of course, when people begin to get word that we weren't together, the first thing people say is, "Calvin, what did you do?" Calvin, what did you do? I said, I said, what made you think I did anything? They're like, huh? Yeah, what made you think I did anything? Because this time I did nothing wrong. And so that was a huge spot in my life. And I can't remember the day exact time, but I know it was in the afternoon. And man, I just broke down crying in this living room because I did not understand. And as a young man, I always dated for marriage. Each of the young ladies that I dated, even had fornication, went through fornication. Only person I did not fornicate with at that time was Bianca. And so I just believed, okay, here I am, a young man, especially African American man, got my doctorate degree, got a house, got a car. I go to church every Sunday. I go to Sunday school every Sunday. What's wrong with me then? Because I'm doing everything right. That's what I said. I'm telling you what I said. I'm doing everything right. I've overcome what society says you can't overcome. I'm living peaceably. I'm not bothering anybody. So why is it that everybody else seems to be getting a wife and not me? What's wrong with me? And then the Lord spoke to me just as clear as I'm speaking to you. He said, "Are you ready to do it my way?" Okay. That just left me bewildered. And so my mom had came over and she could see I was tearing up because she know how much I cared for the young lady. And she prayed with me and she said, "This too shall pass." And I'm grateful to my mom through these two situations. The 4 year relationship, which was very brutal, and this one. Because she prayed with me and said, "This too will pass. You're gonna get a wife. Don't let God work it out." And after she left, the Lord said, "Sit down at the table." And I went and sat down at my dining room table. This house was as dead quiet as you hear this microphone. He says, "Open the book to John, Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1." And that's where it began. And the Lord had me in the scriptures, studying the scriptures, reading the scriptures, learning about who He is. And in the midst of that, I would try to pick up the phone and call old people in my phone, friends and everything. And every time I try to call them, no one would pick up. No one would pick up. He said this to me, and this is, I mean, I've been in this for about a month or two. He says, "Calvin, all you need is me. All you need is me." And I said, "Okay, Lord." I did a fast to kind of just to silence any noise and any voices, just to draw closer to God. And I was so in love with reading the scriptures and studying the scriptures and studying the kingdom and know what it means to be a Christian. That's it. That's the word, to be a Christian. And I was so in love with the word that one day my brother called me and said, "Calvin, guess who I ran into?" I said, "Who?" He said, "I ran into Bianca." I'm like, "Okay, no big deal. All right, good. All right." He said, I'm gonna go get a number from you. I go get a number." I said, "All right, man, go ahead, no big deal." I went back to reading the scriptures. And so then ultimately he lost the number. And then he went back and got it again. And he gave me her number. He said, "Yeah, yeah, man, give her a call, give her a call. Let me tell you something. She sure is fine." I was like, "Oh, okay." Because I was just concerned about the scriptures at this point. That's all I was locked in. God had me in that type of mode. And so I called Bianca. And we began to catch up after. And let me tell you something. It had been 9 years from the time I had left my freshman year in college to that point. It had been 9 whole years. Okay. And so that would put us at 2007. We began kind of just talking casually over the phone in March. And then one day, I'm going to share this part with you. Um, there was a frog in her house, in her apartment. And I said, "Ooh, this is my," and she says, "Oh my God, it's a frog, it's a frog." I said, "Well, get the frog out the house." And she was like, "I ain't touching no frog. I ain't touching no frog." And then I believe I heard the Lord say, go over there and get the frog. Now, let me tell y'all something. I was a farm boy, I was a country boy. I dealt with pigs, chickens, rabbits, and ducks. Frogs, amphibians, and reptiles, yeah, that ain't my speed. But I wanted to see her. I said, okay, I'll come get the frog out your house. So we meet up at this McDonald's. I see her at the car. She said, "Oh, you going?" And she was smiling. So I said, "It's good to see you again." She said, "It's good to see you." And God, thank you, Lord. She was so gorgeous. I just looked into her face. She was so gorgeous. And I got back in my car. And said, "Woo, woo." Now I ain't seen nothing. I just saw her face. And I was like, "Woo, Lord, she is beautiful." And so then I got back. She get out the car. And I go in there. Her mom was in the apartment. And man, I said, "Where's the broom at?" I got the frog out the house. Okay. Because her mama didn't care who came and got the frog out. Just get the frog out the house. And she came out, and I know Bianca gonna say something about it, but look, I'm just being honest. She had on this jean dress, and she looked gorgeous. I was like, wow. And so we began to walk back to my car. And of course, I was like, "It's good to see you." And we had been talking, we just casually talking. And I reached to give her a hug. You know, you try to reach to the two hand hugs, right? And she gave me that friendship hug, kind of remind me, like, yeah, I remember what you did. So she gave me the friendship hug. But man, woo, beautiful, gorgeous. I mean, it wasn't her figure so much it was just this glow about her. And so we began to talk and just kept talking. Then ultimately, she was asking me serious questions about life, about the faith, about my faith walk, about marriage, about kids. What's your perception on this? What's this? I mean, this was real, y'all. She wasn't playing no games. She wasn't talking about how, my physique and that crap. No, it was about what are you bringing to the table? Who are you at this point? Because as much as God had been working on me or dealing with me in those 9 years, God was dealing with her. And I'm going to tell you something off the top. She was much more spiritually mature. Listen to my words, spiritually mature than I was. All right. From all that time, I was cussing like a sailor. I dealt with fornication. I dealt with all the validation, the fear of failure. All this stuff was still there. And then ultimately, July 1st, 2007, I started to ask her, you know, can we exclusively date? She said yes. And before she said yes, let me say that her her best friend, Janice Wood, God rest her soul. Um, Bianca had a conversation with her and said, like, should I give this dude another chance? Because he messed up bad 9 years ago. And Janice basically convinced her that yes, give this dude another chance. And she gave me another chance. And so I thank Janice uh, for God using her to talk to Bianca and put us on this course of where we are even now, 17 years later. So I thank, and God rest Janice's soul. Janice passed away, I think, July 9th or July 8th of that year. So literally about, or July 10th, something around that time. She passed away in a tragic accident. And that was devastating. And it's still devastating to this day. But her legacy lives on, and we carry that, and we constantly keep not just her in our prayers, but also her former husband Joe Woodard and his daughter Journey. And so we love them dearly, and we consistently keep them in prayer. She was a FAMU law student, and so she meant the world to my wife, and I thank God for her, because truly we may not be where we are if it had not been for her talking to Bianca and telling her to give me another chance. And so ultimately, we started dating exclusive July 1st, 2007. Around the month of August, can't pinpoint the date, it was around August. The Lord said to me as I was walking up to my mom's house, Bianca's the one. I said, what? He said, Bianca's the one. She's the one. I said, okay, God. So what, when do I ask her? I said, maybe I'll ask her next year. He said, no, sooner. I said, how about December, Christmas time? He was like, no, sooner. I said, how about Thanksgiving? I'm having this conversation with God. He said, sooner. I said, okay. Well, the next significant day is her birthday. And so I asked her on her birthday. So after a month and a half of dating, I proposed to her. And of course, she said yes. And ultimately, we were married that next year, August 8th, 2008, at 8 o'clock in the very same church that we met at. 9 years later. 10, I'm sorry, nearly 10 years later. God is very funny. He brought my wife to me when she was 14 and I was 17 or 18. And 10 years later, here we are. And so we went through good marriage counseling. And that was just, I was so blessed, and I was in the word, and I was still stuck, going after that word. But one of the things that I admired about Bianca was her conviction of the spirit. Her conviction of the spirit is that when she met me, I had in my house all these African masks, and I was listening to not bad music, but just music that was promoting antichrist doctrine. And you get caught up on a beat. And she was like, "Oh, basically her attitude was, you're gonna stop listening to it, but I'm just gonna present the information and allow the spirit to convict you." And ultimately, that's what she did. And I began to stop listening because I had an understanding. I began to understand the spirit world and how it was impacting the natural. Okay. And if any of you know Bianca, you understand exactly how she's able to see spiritually. And so um, that really blessed me. And then one day I was walking around FAMU High School. I don't know why I was walking around there. And I heard an audible. I heard the Lord speak again. He says, "You're going to be a preacher." And I turned around and looked for somebody because it was just that audible. I looked around, didn't see nobody. And I kept walking. "You're going to be my preacher." Look, I started running and I came home. I said, "Bianca, Bianca, I believe the Lord said I'm going to be a preacher." She says, "You need to fast and pray about it. Ask the Lord about it." And I just went into the scriptures. I fasted and prayed. And then, of course, I ultimately uh, let my pastor know, God rest his soul, Elder Frank Rush, who was also my stepdad. And of course, I did my first trial sermon September 9th, 2008, answering the call. Answering the call. And so I'm going to stop right here because you would say, well, that's your journey to marriage. But notice nothing did I tell you or nothing did I say to you. Oh, thank you, Lord. Reminded me again. Back up. Before I got married, Bianca had sat me down and she says, "Calvin, if you've had sex with any other women, you need to break those soul ties that you made with those women." She said that to me. Okay. And so I had to get before the Lord and denounce the covenant relationships I made with those other women by name. And I did that. She said, because you don't need the enemy trying to bring those people back in your life, and it stirs your heart or it bothers your heart or it reminds you of those intimate times that you were with them. Because when you have sex, it's making a covenant relation. That's why they say you consummate the marriage. Consummate the what? The marriage. Okay. But notice, even up until my point of getting married, I never dealt with what? The anxiety, the fear of failure, the validation, the fornication, that was still there. And I still need to deal with that. So I stop here because my point in sharing all of this with you is I hope that maybe you see something about yourself and what I went through. But my healing and my deliverance happened in the marriage. And that's something I'm going to share with you in the next part of this. But my purpose for sharing all this is that we can help young men and young women who have not gotten married, help you to what? Deal with these issues before you get into marriage. Because I'm grateful it's only by the grace of God that I'm still married for 17 years. It's by the grace of God. Because rest assured, the enemy tested and tried those areas of my life in the marriage. And so if I can share with you my testimony to help prevent you from walking in those dark areas, from getting to deal with those enemies, to deal with those spirits that you've been dealing with all this time before you get into marriage, then hey, praise God for what this message means to you. And so I pray that you listen to this message. I pray you hear my heart. Notice I didn't say anything about dealing with it. So in the next part, I'm going to show you how God helped me deal with it in the marriage. So for those of you who are married, who are dealing with some of these issues, I want to share with you how God helped me overcome and help deliver me from these various spirits in my marriage, so that we can help those who are in marriage that are dealing with these issues come out and be delivered. But we also want to promote so that generations coming behind us don't deal with these issues, but they can actively get healed and delivered before you enter into marriage. So may God bless you till we meet again on Morning Manna.